They laughed when she inherited a broken-down gas station in the middle of nowhere. But beneath the shattered glass and peeling paint lay something no one expected. What if the place your father abandoned was actually the one place he used to protect you? Sophie Luther stared at the worn folder in her hands, trying to process the words she'd just heard. The lawyer's office, tucked inside a quiet building in downtown Detroit, felt colder than it should have. Maybe because her two brothers were already chuckling behind her back. Figures Dad would leave you a gas station. All trashed, muttered Darren, the eldest. You are the dreamer. Sophie didn't respond. She just kept flipping through the papers. Legal documents, a black and white photo of a rundown station, and a hand-signed note that read, "To Sophie, hope you make something of it." Her hands tightened slightly. She hadn't seen her father since she was 9. Just fragments remained. His army boots by the door, the smell of gasoline on his jacket, the way he used to sing Johnny Cash under his breath. Then one day he was gone. Over the years, she tried to reach out. Letters, a few phone calls, all unanswered. Now, decades later, he was dead. And this broken piece of asphalt in the middle of nowhere was her inheritance. Her brothers walked away with checks, substantial ones. Clean, quick, and unceremonious. But she got a rotting patch of highway with a collapsed roof and graffiti on the pumps. It didn't seem fair. Later that night, Sophie sat at her kitchen table with her 14-year-old son Tyler. Bills were stacked near the microwave. Her coffee had gone cold, and the folder lay open between them. "You going to check it out?" Tyler asked, pushing his cereal bowl aside. Sophie sighed. "I should probably just sell it. Scrap value, maybe." The lawyer said it's not even zoned properly. Tyler leaned closer, his brown eyes serious. "But you always said Grandpa might have had his reasons, right? What if there's more to it?" She didn't answer right away. Maybe it was naive. But something in that grainy photo, it didn't just look old. It looked like it had stories. She looked at her son and smiled. "Okay, road trip." 2 days later, Sophie's compact SUV rolled into the heat-struck silence of a 2-lane highway, somewhere between Amarillo and the Oklahoma border. Her daughter Emily slept in the back seat, clutching a pink travel pillow, while Tyler stared out the window, counting trucks. The GPS pinged, and they turned off onto a cracked side road. 5 miles later, there it was, or what was left of it. The canopy was caved in, the pumps half buried in wind-blown dust. Windows were smashed. The sign out front was so faded the letters had almost vanished. "Luther's Pit Stop," it once said, but now she could barely recognize the letters. Sophie parked and got out. She stepped over shattered glass and weeds, pushing open the squeaky office door. Inside, there were broken counters, a dead vending machine, and someone had spray-painted "Get Out" across the wall in red letters. Tyler stepped in behind her. "This is kind of awesome." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "You're easily impressed." But she had to admit the structure was bigger than she expected. A back hallway led to storage rooms, and a narrow set of stairs descended to what looked like a partial basement. The roof needed replacing, but the steel bones of the place were solid. Still, it wasn't livable. So they drove a few minutes up the road and found a roadside inn with a flickering neon sign that read Creekside Motor Lodge. The clerk at the desk was a man in his late 30s with a shaved head, quiet eyes, and a name tag that read Philip. When Sophie mentioned she'd just inherited a property down the road, his gaze sharpened. "You mean Luther's old place?" She hesitated. "Yeah, my father was Alan Luther." Philip studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "He was a good man. Haven't seen him in a few years, though. Used to come by late at night, drink coffee out of a thermos, listen to the radio." Sophie's throat tightened. "He never talked to us. Not since I was a kid." Philip just said, "Some people carry more ghosts than they can fit in a house," then handed her the room key. That night, Sophie lay awake, staring at the motel ceiling fan as it ticked in slow, uneven rhythm. Alan had left. He hadn't written, but he'd left her the station. Why? The next morning, Sophie returned with Tyler and Emily, this time with gloves, garbage bags, and a small toolkit. They started clearing the debris, broken glass, empty bottles, torn insulation. Tyler found a rusted coin-op air pump. Emily swept the corner shelf. By midday, they had uncovered the front desk, a vintage cooler, and a rack of old trucker maps from the 80s. Then something strange happened. Pickup pulled in. Then another. And another. One by one, men got out, gray-haired, sun-weathered, many in military jackets or ball caps with insignias. Marines, airborne, Vietnam vet. They didn't speak much, but one walked up to Sophie and simply said, "Heard all's girl was back. Just wanted to see it with my own eyes." Another added, "He kept us fed more times than I can count. When the VA couldn't help, this place did." Sophie, speechless, offered them water and chairs. They didn't stay long, but before leaving, one of the men said, "He always said this was a way station, not a stop. Don't let it die." When they were gone, Sophie stood in the silence of the gas station. She'd come here expecting to walk away, but something was keeping her here. By the third morning, the gas station didn't look good, but it no longer looked dead. Sophie swept the front step while Emily read some old magazines she found inside the cabinets. Tyler had taken to cataloging everything strange he could find. Rusted tools, a dented CB radio, even a Polaroid of a dog with the words, "Benny 98, scribbled on the back. The days were hot, the nights quiet, and still, people kept showing up. Not many, never more than one or two at a time, but all of them walked through the ruined station like it meant something. Most were veterans. A few were drivers who said they'd stopped here over the years because it felt safe. A man in a yellow truck, with a shaking hand, left a cup of coffee on the front counter. Another left a medallion from the 101st Airborne and nodded once before returning to his truck. Sophie didn't know what to make of it. Her father had never told her anything. No letters, no voicemails, no apologies, only silence. And yet, these men, total strangers, spoke of him as if he had been a shelter in the storm. Late that afternoon, Sophie was cleaning behind the back office when she noticed something strange. A row of heavy wooden boards stacked awkwardly against the wall. She started to pull them aside and noticed the faint outline of a door behind them. No knob, just an uneven seam and an iron hinge nearly rusted solid. She called Tyler over. Together they pried the boards away and pushed the door until it gave way with a low groan. Behind it, a narrow concrete stairwell leading downward, lit only by a faint beam of dusty sunlight from a vent above. Sophie hesitated. "Should we go down?" Tyler whispered. She nodded slowly. "Yeah." Grabbed the flashlight. The basement was cool and dry, lined with old brick and thick wooden beams. On the far wall, a row of metal filing cabinets. In the corner, a trunk. Not the kind you find in attics. Military grade. Olive green. Locked with a steel clasp and heavy with dust. They stood quietly for a moment, absorbing the stillness. "This doesn't feel like a gas station," Sophie murmured. "No," Tyler said. "It feels like a bunker." Sophie knelt beside the trunk and brushed off the lid. Her breath caught. Stenciled faintly on the side, barely visible through the grime, were the words, "Luther Property of U.S. Government," and below it, a faded serial number. Inside a cardboard box nearby, she found documents. Maps with strange markings, lists of radio frequencies, and files stamped, "Classified, do not duplicate." Another folder held photographs, black and white, curling at the corners. Soldiers standing near remote aircraft. Trucks parked in remote terrain. And in the center of one photo, Alan Luther, standing next to a broad-shouldered man with dark eyes and a trimmed gray beard. Someone she recognized. George, the quiet old man who lived in the trailer behind the Creekside Motor Lodge. Philip's father. Her pulse quickened. It wasn't just old war memorabilia. Her father and George had worked together. And whatever they were doing, it wasn't just truck repairs and fuel sales. That evening, after putting the kids to bed, Sophie walked across the gravel lot behind the motel and knocked on the door of the trailer. George answered slowly, shirt tucked in, eyes calm as a still pond. "I figured you'd come by," he said. Sophie held up the photo. "How long were you going to wait before telling me the truth?" George didn't seem startled. He motioned for her to sit outside under the awning, where a dusty lawn chair faced the field. "Your father asked me to wait." Said if you were curious enough to find the basement, you'd be strong enough to know. Sophie sat slowly. What was this place? George looked out toward the highway. It was a listening post. Communications relay. Data drops. During the Cold War and for years after, we passed information through here in code in person by radio. People thought we were just greasy old truckers. That's what we wanted. He paused, then added, your father was one of the best handlers I ever met. Steady, sharp, loyal. But why hide it from us? Sophie asked, her voice strained. Why disappear from his family? George sighed. Because being close to you put you at risk. We weren't paper pushers. We ran assets. Some people didn't want us to live long enough to retire. Your father never stopped watching your life, Sophie. But the job didn't end when he came home. Sophie swallowed hard. The image of the ruined station, of her father sitting there alone at night with a thermos and a transistor radio, took on a new meaning. He asked you to let the place rot? She asked. George nodded. He thought if the place looked dead, no one would think to come looking. There are things hidden there, things even I haven't touched. But he told me one of you kids might come back someday. And if you did, I was to protect you long enough to find out why. Sophie's mind reeled. The silence, the distance, the coldness, it wasn't neglect. It was protection. It didn't make the pain easier, but it changed its shape. Why now? She asked. Why leave it to me? George smiled faintly. Maybe because you were the only one who ever tried to call. The next day, Sophie returned to the station early, determined to keep her hands and mind busy. The more she scrubbed the walls, swept the dust, and scraped off decades of grime, the more she felt like she was slowly reclaiming something that had never really belonged to her, but maybe could, now. Tyler and Emily joined her in the afternoon, each carrying bags of tools and supplies they'd picked up with Philip's help from a warehouse in town. The three of them worked as a team, Emily organizing the old brochures and receipts in the front office, Sophie clearing out shelves in the back, and Tyler hauling out heavier debris from the side rooms and sorting what could still be salvaged. That's when Sophie returned to the old basement and opened the trunk again, trying to make sense of the documents she had only skimmed the day before. The files inside weren't just random papers, they were organized with care. Tidy folders, maps with hand-drawn notations, equipment tags, and wedged between two crates was a metal lockbox she hadn't noticed before. She didn't know how to open it. It was heavy, unmarked. She pulled it out, dusted it off, and set it on a nearby table. It had no label, no keyhole, just a dial like a combination safe. She turned it gently, listening for a click. Nothing. Tried again. Still locked. Sophie sighed, frustrated, and placed it aside. There were too many mysteries, too many unfinished thoughts. Maybe it wasn't even important. She focused instead on cleaning out the rest of the trunk and examining a thick envelope labeled only Ops Archive, filled with field reports that looked more like they belonged to an intelligence agency than a gas station owner. Later that evening, while Sophie reorganized a file cabinet upstairs, Tyler came up from the basement holding the metal box in both hands. Hey, Mom? You forgot this. Sophie glanced back. That thing again? I've been messing with it, he said, placing it on the counter. It's not a standard lock. Looks military. But I had an idea. He pulled a small photograph from his back pocket, the same one Sophie had shown him days earlier. It was one of the only keepsakes she'd kept from her father. A worn picture of him in uniform, standing next to a nondescript Jeep, squinting against the sun. Sophie had looked at it dozens of times, but now Tyler pointed to the back. Look, he said. There's a date written here. Sophie flipped it over. In faded pencil, barely legible after so many years, were the numbers 0 for 1787. She stared at it, puzzled. That's not anyone's birthday, she murmured. Tyler tapped the lockbox. Still might be worth a try. Sophie hesitated, then slowly spun the dial. 0, 4, 1, 7. With a soft click, the lock released. They both froze. She opened the lid slowly. Inside, wrapped in a cloth pouch, was a small bundle of sealed papers. Beneath that, nestled in velvet-lined compartments, were several uncut diamonds, clear, jagged stones that sparkled faintly even in the dim light. Next to them lay a pair of heavy gold bars, dulled by time but unmistakably real. And below those, a stack of sealed envelopes marked with faded government insignias and strings of authorization codes. Sophie stared at it all in silence. The diamonds alone were worth a fortune. But it wasn't just the value that stunned her. It was the fact that her father had kept it hidden, untouched, waiting. But it was the envelope on top that drew her attention. It was addressed in firm block lettering. To Sophie, she stared at it in silence. Tyler stepped back, sensing that this wasn't his moment. "I'll check on Emily," he said quietly. Sophie nodded, unable to speak. She sat down at the counter and opened the letter with shaking hands. "My Sophie, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you were brave enough to find what I left behind. I hope that somehow you'll understand why I did things the way I did. I never stopped loving you, never stopped watching over you. Every step you took, school, your wedding, your children, I was there in the quiet. But I couldn't be near. I couldn't risk what I knew coming back to hurt you or your brothers. This station was never just a job. It was part of a network, quiet work done by quiet people. We moved information, protected people, cleaned up what others left behind. It may not sound noble, but it saved lives. The gold and assets you found, these are rewards from successful missions. Bonuses never claimed. Payment not in dollars, but in discretion. I held on to them because I believed someone in our family would one day do something honest with it. You were the one who called, the one who tried, and that's why I left this to you. What happens next is yours to decide. But if you choose to carry this forward, make it a place where people still feel safe. A place where those who are forgotten can stop, rest, and be remembered. I love you more than words can say. Dad." Sophie folded the letter and held it against her chest, her eyes wet but steady. Her father hadn't vanished out of coldness. He had sacrificed his presence to protect them from shadows they would never fully see. And now, in the light of this broken building, he had given her a choice. Not an obligation, a legacy. That night, Sophie called George. He arrived just after sundown, arms crossed, posture relaxed as always. The air around the station was cooler than usual, the kind of quiet that made old memories feel close. Sophie met him at the doorway and handed him two things: a sealed government envelope from the lockbox and the photograph. He took his time with both. First, the envelope. He slid a pocket knife under the flap and carefully unfolded the contents, scanning the faded typeface. A low whistle escaped his lips. "I'll be damned," he muttered. He kept the whole inventory. "So it's real?" Sophie asked, arms folded, watching him closely. George nodded, eyes still on the paper. "Very real. These were payments from ops. When the government couldn't pay in dollars because they couldn't admit the mission even happened, they paid like this. Gold, bonds, diamonds. Only a handful of handlers ever got to collect. Your dad must have kept it all hidden right here. In a lockbox under dust and mold," Sophie said, almost laughing. "Trust no one," George replied. "That was the rule." She looked at him. "He trusted you." George's gaze softened. "He trusted you, Sophie. More than you know." Sophie reached into her pocket and pulled out the photo. She placed it gently in George's hands. "What about this?" April 17th, 1987. It was written on the back. It opened the lock. George studied the image for a long time before answering. "I remember this day," he said, his voice lower now. "That was a mission. One of the big ones." "Where?" Sophie asked. He exhaled slowly. "Sofia, capital of Bulgaria. We were deep in it, cross-border intel exchange, dangerous extraction, no backup. Your father coordinated the whole operation. Cool under pressure. Got everyone out safe." Sophie stared at the photo again. "Sofia?" George looked at her. "He told me once if he ever had a daughter, he'd name her after that city. Said it was the first time in years he felt hope. Something about that place reminded him there was still light in the world. That's why you're Sophie." She blinked. "He never told me that. He never told anyone," George said gently. "But he wrote it down." Sophie was quiet for a while, staring at the worn beams overhead, as if seeing them for the first time. Then she smiled faintly and gestured toward the back of the room. He wanted this place to mean something again. George nodded. And it still can. But not if you're doing it alone. I won't be. The next morning, Sophie met Tyler and Emily in the front room, sunlight pouring through the repaired window. We're rebuilding, she told them. Not just fixing up a building. We're turning it into what Grandpa always meant it to be. Tyler grinned. So, we're open for business? Sophie nodded. Not just fuel. Help. Rest. A place where no one's forgotten. Emily reached for the new station logbook and began scribbling names of visitors they'd met. Curtis, Reggie, the man with the flag. Sophie stood at the threshold of the office, the air buzzing with quiet movement behind her. The past had finally spoken, and now it was her turn to answer. The next few weeks passed like chapters of a life being rewritten. Sophie woke up each day with dirt under her nails and paint in her hair. She'd never managed a renovation before, but something about rebuilding this place felt natural, personal, like she was repairing more than wood and wires, like she was repairing history. George showed up daily, tools in hand and stories in his back pocket. He never over-explained, never hovered, just guided her when she hit a wall, both figuratively and literally. Tyler helped replace broken lights. Emily designed a new sign using old stencils and bold, hopeful colors. The cracked fuel pumps were hauled away. A new awning was welded into place. Inside, they scrubbed away years of grime, revealing walls that still held echoes of voices from decades past. And through it all, veterans continued to arrive. Some brought tools. Others brought donations. A few just stood in silence, tears in their eyes, taking in the fact that All Station was alive again. Sophie began setting aside a corner of the main room, a memory wall. She hung her father's photo, the same one from the trunk, standing beside George in uniform. Beside it, a small case holding the folded flag, the dog tag she found with the key, and a handwritten sign that read, "If you knew Alan Luther, this place is for you." She didn't announce the project, didn't post online, and yet, the word spread. One afternoon, as she was painting the doorframe, a silver SUV pulled up. Darren stepped out first, in a dress shirt and sunglasses. Then Scott, her younger brother, still in gym clothes, clearly unsure why they'd come. Sophie met them outside. Darren looked around. "You really did all this?" She nodded. "It's not finished, but it's working." Scott wandered toward the lot. "This place was a dump in the pictures." "I know." Darren frowned. "So, the stories? The money? Is that true?" Sophie didn't answer right away. She led them inside. She didn't have to say a word. The moment they stepped into the renovated front room, saw the photos, the flag, the archive wall with decades of names, they understood. Their father hadn't abandoned them. He had protected them, at a cost. Darren's jaw tightened. Why didn't he ever say anything? "Because it wasn't safe," Sophie said softly. "He was still watching. George told me. He kept track of all of us. He just couldn't risk being close." Scott stepped up to the wall, running a finger along a black and white photo of Alan with two men she didn't recognize. "They never teach this part of service, do they?" he said quietly. "What it costs." Sophie didn't cry. She'd done her mourning. What she felt now was something different. Resolution. "We have a chance to do something with it," she said. "Use what he left to help the people he helped. This place was a refuge. I want it to be that again." Darren looked at her. For the first time in years, there was no sarcasm, no distance, just a brother seeing his sister clearly. "You need help," Sophie smiled. "Always." A month later, the station had its soft reopening. It had coffee brewed at sunrise, chairs set outside, a fresh flag flying over the lot, and a sign painted by Emily, "Luther's Station, for those who keep moving forward." Truckers began stopping again, not just to fuel up, but to sit, rest, talk. Veterans found their way back too, some arriving with stories, others with silence. One evening, just before closing, an older man in a denim jacket stepped inside. He walked slowly to the counter, took off his cap, and looked at Sophie. "You're All's girl." She nodded. He handed her a folded envelope. "He helped me once," the man said. "In 1993. Don't know if he ever told anyone, but I've carried this ever since. Told myself I'd pass it on to his family if I ever found them. She opened the envelope. Inside, a thank you note, barely legible from time, and a photo of her father standing beside the man's family, smiling. Sophie blinked hard. Thank you for bringing this. The man smiled, tipped his head, and walked back to his truck without another word. That night, after locking up, Sophie stood outside in the fading light. The building behind her buzzed with life again. Her children were inside, laughing. George had stayed late, finishing the porch steps. She looked up at the sky and whispered, I kept my promise. And for the first time since this journey began, she didn't feel like she was rebuilding something broken. She was continuing something sacred. This story reminds us that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't made of gold. They're built from sacrifice, love, and second chances. What would you have done in Sophie's place? Let us know in the comments. If this story moved you, please give it a like, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to Embrace the Journey for more stories like this.